10 seconds countdown. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. I'm glad to welcome you in the premises of International Multimedia Press Center. Today we are meeting within the framework of the Second International North Forum on Sustainable Development. I welcome our participants on the called InfoWar in the Arctic region. Together with us, Vladimir Petrovsky, Senior Fellow from the Center of Research and Focusing of the Russian-Chinese Relations of the Oriental Studies Institute, Mr. Vinokur from the Russian Foreign Ministry, and via conference call we have Tim Anderson. Tim, good morning. Today I would like to discuss with you the topic of InfoWar or cyber war in the Arctic region, and to begin with I would like to introduce to all of you some research which we held in the framework of our project Arctic.ru, which is the organizer of today's meeting. May I have my presentation on the screen? Thank you. So we have monitored top 10 types of mass media from all the circumpolar countries, and we decided to look at the information situation in Finland and Sweden in order to somehow analyze the situation over there. So it means that the research was done in several languages, including the Nordic languages and Chinese. And we looked at the topics which usually become hot spots for the mass media. So information about the indigenous people, about certain disasters, environment, economic development, climate change, etc. The total number of publications was in the following proportion. About 20% of all the publications tell us about the climate change. And this is no surprise because major events are taking place there, and the rest of the world is keeping track of that. Certainly mass media is interested in the economic, technological, infrastructural development. Certainly the topic of Arctic militarization is still relevant for today. Mining, international policy, environment, etc., etc. So this is the breakdown in terms of percentage and topics covered by the mass media. We looked at the Russian media, what our colleagues are writing about. Sadly, this year, due to a specific economic zone in Russia, the economic, technological, infrastructural development take the focal point. The Northern Sea route, for instance, is something which is still in the limelight of the Russian media. Mining is number 2, Arctic militarization, and climate change, ecology, and scientific projects are all there. If we look at other countries, then, for instance, in Norway, the media would be much more interested in international politics and militarization of Arctic, and environment would be only second to that. Back to Sweden, the climate change there is one of the key topics. It is followed by Arctic militarization, scientific projects, incidences, and international policy. In Iceland, the climate change is the hottest topic. Incidents and natural disasters, Arctic militarization are second to that. In Denmark, number 1 is international policy, with actually because Donald Trump said that the United States is ready to buy Greenland from Iceland. And Canada. We, for the first time, did that research. We cannot speak about trends, but following the common trend, Canada is very much different from other countries because the first places are occupied by scientific projects, and tourism is the second most popular topic. Surprisingly, in other countries, tourism is not covered so broadly. If we speak about the United States, the lion's share of publications are dedicated to climate change, followed by scientific projects, international projects, and incidences and tourism are somewhere in the bottom. Certainly, we looked at Finland and China. The main trends have been confirmed. Climate change is the most popular topic, followed by militarization, international policy, environment, etc. So the trends differ depending on the interests of the countries in the region. And we decided to move forward to have a look at what international media are writing about Russia. How much the countries are focusing on Russia. So the publications range from 30 to 15%, and it is proportionate to the geographical scale of Russia. We looked at the topics covered by the international media: climate change, and Norilsk disaster has become one of the main topics, followed by economic and technological development, Arctic militarization, special economic zone in the Arctic region, Northern Sea route, because NATO countries and the United States certainly are very much interested in the military exercises and drills which Russia does on its own territory. We also looked at the sentiments in the media, what is their attitude towards Russia. The lion's share, that was very much expected, the lion's share of publications are quite neutral. So they just published some pieces of information. About 7% of all the publications are negative and 10% are positive. If we look in more detail with the breakdown by the countries, we can note certain trends. If we speak about negative reactions, then certainly it's an open secret that probably number one, that the United States in terms of negative feedback about Russia. And it was a total surprise for us that Sweden also treats Russia very negatively, and probably it was due to Norilsk accident, because the Swedes are the people who are very much preoccupied about environment. And as I said, the main negative topics are related to climate change, Norilsk, oil spill, and military exercises and drills, because they concern the international politicians. If we look at the positive trends, then it turns out that Iceland and Finland think of Russia more positively than anyone else, followed by Norway and the United States and Denmark. If we look at the positive trends, what was positive about Russia depicted in the international media? This was about the remnants of the mammoth body extracted in the Siberian permafrost. This is about tourism, and certainly our economic projects and protection of the indigenous people's interests. Some other trends there, which also are not surprising, some key events take place, and they certainly affect the international agenda and make the day of the media. We know that ourselves. And probably it would be interesting to do the same research next year in order to have some benchmark to find out how the informational agenda affects the publications where there are certain trends. For instance, climate change or some international policy which is covered anytime. So this is the end of my presentation, and I would like to pass the floor to Tim Anderson from Sweden so that he could share with us, he's familiar with our research, and probably he could share with us his opinion, provide his feedback regarding that information, and probably how he sees that information, because we see that Sweden may differ in terms of how it views the Arctic region. Tim, over to you.
Yes, thank you for having me today. I think, and thank you for the interesting comparison that you have done and collected. I am not that surprised that climate change is one of the top news articles when you're looking at news articles about Russia in both Sweden and the neighboring countries. I think it's quite a natural thing. we in Sweden, Norway, and Finland, at least, the Nordic countries, are quite occupied at the moment, media-wise, with the ongoing climate change. And when you have the incident in Norilsk that might be affected by climate change and the thawing of the permafrost, of course, it's connected. I think it's also quite natural that the neighboring countries to Russia, especially Norway, you can see a higher increase of Arctic militarization issues. Of course, when you are a neighbor country to Russia, I see that it's quite natural to be more, let's say, worried about this terms of events. Speak about Sweden in particular. Sweden's relationship media-wise with Russia is, I would not say it's negative in saying, journalists writing ordinary news articles, main emphasis of a professional journalist is to be as objective as possible. And I feel that my colleagues in Sweden try to be, in many ways are, but there is a different aspect of the opinion articles that in Swedish newspapers, a different part of the text or of the newspapers. And there you can see much more, let's say, critical aspect of Russia. Why hasn't Russia worked with preventing the incidents that, like Norilsk, for example? I can see that then there's a trend of being much more heavily critical against Russian authorities, as the same as the opinion journalists are towards things that's happened in Sweden. We also have ecological problems, disasters. We have one big news story right now about the oil company Preem, who wanted to open an oil refinery in Sweden. And it was a huge discussion and debate amongst the environmental groups against this opening. And it put the government of Sweden in a very tough political spot. But now they have withdrawn this application to do this. And you can see also this trend that when it comes to climate change and ecological issues, Swedish opinion makers or Swedish opinion journalists, in what better way, is quite harsh and critical. And this is not only unique to Russia. Moreover, I would say that from our perspective, I represent Barents Press, and we work with international cooperation and mainly cooperation between Russian and Swedish journalists. And from my standpoint, my personal standpoint, is that Sweden only has a couple of correspondents in Russia. I think we have right now around 4 or 5 permanent correspondents in Moscow. And Russia is a huge country for us. And that says something about how important we see Russia compared to, let's say, America, the United States of America, where we have a bigger media attention, so to say. And I think this also reflects sort of the survey and the research. We have fewer articles written in general about Russia compared to the United States, for example. In general, I would say that there is a big interest in the Arctic expansion. There is a big interest in how Russia treats the Arctic and how Russia deals with the Arctic policy. So I'm not that surprised that there is a great deal of attention in this matter. Yeah, I think that's just some general thoughts, and if there would be a panel discussion, I would be happy to join it.
Tim, we have several questions which we received from the audience, and one goes to you. What do you think? To what extent Arctic can become and should it become a symbol of a dialogue and mutual cooperation, win-win cooperation between different countries? An example of a region which is totally free of military conflicts? Can it become such a territory, and will it become it?
Well, I'm only a mere journalist and not a politician, I think, who is ending up with deciding and discussing these issues. I think that the Arctic region has an history of peaceful cooperation, of peaceful exploration. I would think that it would be a shame to have another move of direction in this case. I really, I think that when speaking about journalism, I see that there is a great deal of potential in working together, revolving these topics and avoiding misinformation and let's say so-called fake news. And I think one of those steps towards that is talking honesty, cooperation between journalists directly. And I think that's a lacking matter at the moment in general between Sweden or the Nordic countries, let's say, and Russia.
Thank you so much. We were glad to hear you. Thank you so much for your opinion. I'm passing the floor to Vladimir Petrovsky from the Far Eastern Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. How they account for the whole situation there. Dear colleagues, it's very interesting to monitor the media, and some things were very surprising for me. I have to deal with the Arctic region, Arctic issues. So, for instance, we study the policy of China in the Arctic region. When looked at the top priority news in the polar and second polar countries, I was very much surprised that most of them are preoccupied with the militarization of Arctic. As far as I'm an expert in military issues, and I'm speaking first of all about the non-Russian media, about foreign media, when we have such a conveying of information and when their priority is attached to the alleged militarization of Arctic, I think that the focus shifts and the coverage becomes biased when most other publications are dedicated not to melting of permafrost or to climate change. So these things are quite natural, but it is followed by militarization of Arctic, which is totally surprising. And sometimes militarization of Arctic is mentioned in association with Russia, which is totally wrong. Along with my colleague, we are finishing a book, Russia and China in the Arctic region. And the big section there is dedicated to the military and political issues. If we look objectively at what Russia is doing in the Arctic region, then Russia is not showcasing its military might. Russia is upgrading, modernizing its capacity in order to protect its sovereignty. And Russia is a huge geographical nation. At least 7 regions actually are located in the second polar territory, Northern Sea route, etc., etc., and we have to protect these territories. And speaking about Russia, our foreign colleagues usually forget that you have to compare the rise in the military preparations against the Soviet period. If we compare that to the Soviet period, then we see that Russia is increasing its military might very modestly, because in the Soviet times the Arctic military potential was huge. And again, our colleagues, our foreign colleagues, understand that very well, and it would be good if journalists understand the same, that in the Arctic region, any infrastructure, whether this is about some bases or some ports, they are of double destination, the military and the civil one, by definition, because actually this is the nature of the region. And so once our colleagues from abroad write that the Russians built another base, and sadly it is of double destination, it will serve for the civil supplies chain, and military troops would be there just not dramatically present. All the circumpolar countries, they increase their military presence there, following the security dilemma. When you see that your Arctic neighbor is increasing their military capacity, you will do the same in order to secure yourself. And this is a vicious circle, which is very difficult to rupture. The only way to get out of this vicious circle is to increase the confidence and trust building measures. And Russia suggested to do that more than once, and foreign counterparts rejected that idea every time. Let me showcase how the situation is distorted. Some very obvious fake news. Quite recently, Mr. Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, said something about submarines in the Arctic Sea and that this concerns them all. Well, actually, yes. In essence, the lion's share of the military might of all the Arctic nations. This is about submarines which go under the sea, and the deterrence forces of Russia and the United States are in the Arctic region as well. So what are you going to do about these submarines? There is Open Skies Treaty, meaning that everything can be observed from air. But the United States decided to walk out of that treaty, and the Nordic experts suggested a very acceptable option, despite the fact that it would be very difficult to do, because the submarine fleet was actually designed to be untraceable. But even this issue can be addressed once we have a political will. For instance, our German colleagues have the following suggestion: that the Arctic Sea is split into several sectors, and we sign an agreement that almost all the submarines, when crossing these sectors, they would send special radio message through the buoys. But this would be done with retention. So it means that those who do the monitoring could have the general glimpse, general impression of what units are moving anywhere. But it can be done with retention so that the submarine itself is not identified. So it means that solutions are there on the table, and Russia suggested these ideas more than once, and Russia even suggested to set up the Arctic General's staff, but remained unheard. And the only stakeholder in the Arctic region, that's NATO with its own policy. Just another example about fake news, and this certainly concerns Russia and China. I think that it was Mark Esper, defense minister, said that actually the United States is scared by the potential cooperation between Russia and China. And military cooperation is non-existent. China and Russia are really discussing cooperation in the Arctic region, but purely along the trade and economic lines, because Russia wants to upgrade and modernize the Northern Sea route in order to bring goods from Europe to the Asian market. So this is something which is discussed between Russia and China, but no one is speaking about some military things. Because, for instance, the Chinese are not present in military terms in the Arctic region. And there are some anti-Chinese phobias as well, quite traditional things for Arctic regions and Arctic countries. Some anti-Chinese sentiments are being raised. Countries fear that China will increase its presence there and would conquer everything. So, a story from last year, Pentagon usually publishes a big report on the military preparations of China. This is usually done before the budget is drafted. And a very thick volume of a report, 136 pages thick report, was published last year. And the special topic was about the Chinese policy in the Arctic region. I deep dived there and just I saw that only half of a page is dedicated to that. And it stated that in case China actually increases its peaceful scientific activity in the Arctic region, then theoretically China may have chances to increase their military preparations there too. Mike Pompeo, a week after, told his colleagues in the Arctic Council, saying that we have a report which proves that China is increasing their military presence in the Arctic region. So, purely academic assumption translated into such a statement, and later on it translated in some publications in the media, resulting in militarization of the Arctic region. I do think that this is how the information picture is being depicted, where we can avoid such distortion of information. And there are some things I would like to say about Northern Syria, but probably later. Thank you so much. And I will ask a question about the Northern Syria myself. We all know that China has built and has commissioned its first icebreaker. They visited the Antarctic region, and now they're going to the North Pole. Many countries insist on making the Northern Sea route an international channel, that it should be an international route which belongs not to one country, but which lets everyone in. My question is, in your opinion, can this happen? Whether Russia is ready to let foreign vessels and icebreakers to our borders, because Northern Sea route, this is not about high seas of the Arctic region, this is the border region. Do you think China is going to discover Arctic later on? They are very much interested in that, and I know that this topic preoccupies the Chinese very much, and we know that the tourist flow to the Arctic region mainly is comprised of the Chinese. So are we going to let the Chinese to the Far Eastern part or to the Northern Sea route? And the Far Eastern region is not part of the Northern Sea route as far as I know. Thank you so much for a very interesting question. Actually, there are two questions. First of all, is about the status of the Northern Sea route. And the second one is about China being interested in using that channel. As for the status, this is a long-lasting dispute. All the time, many parties to that dispute make reference to the International Maritime Convention. Allegedly, the Northern Sea route is referred to as international waters, but the same convention says that in case we speak about the northern longitudes, which most of the year are covered by ice with harsh climate conditions, and in the vicinity of 200-mile economic zone, this country is entitled to regulate the navigation there, applying its national legislation. This is what Russia really does. So it means that Russia is entitled to regulate the Northern Sea route navigation. There is a law which states that the Northern Sea route is a national strategic transportation communication channel. And the Canadians did the same thing. So they said that the so-called Western Passage or Strait is the Canadian territory. Our American counterparts very often make reference to that convention and say that Russia violates that. And it looks very strange because the Americans did not sign that convention, but they teach us what to do. Russia is not against opening up the Northern Sea route for international navigation. There are no bans. But Actually, the only condition is that the Northern Sea route navigation has to be accompanied by Russian icebreakers. Michael Gorbachev, back in 1987, proclaimed Murmansk Initiative. One of the items said that the Soviet Union is ready to open the Northern Sea route, but under the condition that Russia accompanies the vessels with its icebreakers. China is really very much interested in that, because this is one of the opportunities to deliver goods and commodities. But there is another thing which our Chinese colleagues are not happy about. So they complain about too costly ice-breaking services, etc. The Northern Sea route needs upgrading and modernization. In terms of hardware and infrastructure, we have to build new ports, warehouses, bypasses, and software such as satellite communication systems. These things have to be upgraded, and it needs investments to the tune of several $billion. There is a working group between Russia and China which states that if China wants to become a priority partner, let China invest into the upgrading of the Northern Sea route. But the future belongs to the fact that the Northern Sea route will be opened for the international vessels, but under the Russian legislation. And China is not against that. Yes, I cannot agree more. And I'm passing the floor to Vladimir Vinokurov. Over to you. Thank you, Yulia. Good afternoon, dear friends. I also have to say that prior to that discussion, we could get familiar with the research of the publications on the Arctic region among the Arctic and circumpolar countries. Certainly, the more that we speak about the Arctic region and problems which are pertinent to that region, the more problems we have in the area for international relations, foreign affairs. I would like to make reference to Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten, which I read very attentively when I spent 7 years in the Soviet embassy in Copenhagen. End of 2018, this newspaper published an article called "A new stage of arms race in the Arctic has started." And they also stressed that 2 or 3 years ago, there was less attention paid to the militarization of the Arctic region, because we always thought that in the area of policy and diplomacy that this region is of low tension, and this is a conflict-free region, and it only takes to start cooperation and to prevent that this region is no longer conflict-free and is marked by some tensions. Denmark, in that sense, voice what is typical of the mass media of the Arctic 5 nations. Although Denmark has become a member of that group of 5, as Greenland is part of that country, and it borders the circumpolar region, but the Denmark is quite active in exploring different ways and topics. I'd like to express my opinion towards our discussion and to the presentations which have already been made. When we speak about Infowar, and when we extrapolate that onto the Arctic region, we have to see that in two dimensions, in my opinion. First of all, this is due to how the international affairs and military and political situation in the Arctic region crop out. And we have to look at the attitude towards Infowar. There is a causality relation about that. And I made reference to this Danish newspaper stating that our partners within Group of Five, they're more and more interested in that area, but Infowar is not pertinent to one region alone. Either Infowar embraces the whole of the international community. It is waged by politicians and journalists, etc., etc., or there is no such war at all. When we speak about Infowar, and when we look at the Arctic region, and you very correctly said that this is a cold Infowar, and Cold War means not the cold waters of the Arctic Sea, but what we mean is that the situation there becomes tenser and tenser, and the main objective is to put an end to such trend. This is what the international community has to focus on. I will not actually go into more detail about the differentiation between these categories. And the Infowar is waged against Russia by all the banned means. It acquires ideological dressing. How else we can characterize the decision taken by the European Parliament, which requires that we have to revisit the amendments to the Constitution? During the Cold War, when we focused on the Arctic issues, but to a less extent, no party to the conflict allowed anything like that. But now we live in a very tense situation, and certainly, and I totally agree with our colleague Tim Anderson from Sweden, that sadly what the mass media is writing about, especially the northern European countries are writing about, they are very critical of Russia. And these statements do not serve the very objective of strengthening of international cooperation. The problem is that there are lots of interests coinciding in the Arctic region. And these interests concern the national security and economic issues. And last but not least, these issues concern humanitarian cooperation, something which we discuss at the Barents Sea Cooperation or within the Northern Council of the Nordic countries and the rest. Once we speak about national security, let us not forget that Arctic region is home to the shortest route of the strategic bombers and strategic intercontinental ballistic missiles. American ones and Russian ones. There are lots of Russian facilities and sites of civil and military designation. And Russia is restoring what was lost during the Soviet period of time, and I'm sure that this policy will intensify there because we have economic interests there. Let us look at the statistics. 11% of the national gross product comes from that region. 11 or 12% of export has been generated by that region. We have huge deposits and fields of discovered and undiscovered oil and gas, and our deposits and fields are depleting. So Russia will run out of oil in 30 years and will run out of gas in 50 years. When we speak about economy, and I agree with Mr. Petrovsky, certainly we speak about the Northern Sea route. The problem is that the Northern Sea route is a part of the northern region, which actually goes through tundra, through the high north areas. And the Northern Sea route, this is a very painful problem, meaning that it halves the time taken to deliver goods from Europe to Asia. And by 2040, the situation in the Arctic region will improve in terms of ice melting. And then the Northern Sea route will become the main international route or channel, but I would put the word international in brackets, in parentheses, because part of that Northern Sea route goes through the national Russian waters, and there is no doubt that no one will dare cross that waters. It was correctly said that Canada, for instance, doesn't let any options regarding the Western Strait. But this is our strait, and we are the ones to offer the rules. The strategy adopted by Russia once again reiterated the status of the Northern Sea route. All the international vessels can go along that route, only accompanied by Russian vessels, by Russian icebreakers, with the warning of 45 days ahead. In 2010, we actually had only 4 such vessels. Today, there are many more of them from Rotterdam. And let me stress that once again, that once ice melts more, the situation would be better. The infrastructure requires upgrading and improvement. And this concerns the unloading, loading, the container transportation, which has to be very special. And for instance, certain products cannot be shipped through the Northern Sea route unless special containers, ice-resistant containers, are provided. But how can we justify what we are doing in the Arctic region? And the Nordic countries' people really understand that Russia is here forever, that this is natural for Russia to be present there. and any decisions taken by the Russian government to improve the living standards of the indigenous people. And voyage escorting or ice-breaking services offered for other nations. These things are very legitimate. And actually, when we stress all these things, I would pay more attention to the fact that Arctic region is much closer to Russia than to any other country. Arctica actually is translated from Greek as bear, a bear, the animal which Russia associates with. So anyhow, this is our land from very ancient ages, where the territory which was conquered and discovered by courageous people, Yermak or Lazarev brothers. For instance, in the international law, the given reality actually is being used as a notion. And Americans even tore taxes away from Mexico, and even now are threatening to build a wall. And we have to draw that line, and we have to be very conservative, very hawkish in our policy. And this prescription by which ownership of things, or acquisitive prescription, is a very good notice. We are now speaking about the diplomacy of speaking from strength. Admiral Spencer from the United States said that he would dispatch American fleet to the Northern Sea route. They wanted to stage a provocation, just like the one which was staged in the Kerch Strait. They changed up their mind because the public opinion mocked that. As far as there are no icebreakers in the United States. The United States has only 2 icebreakers, or 1.5, because the second icebreaker is used as a warehouse, floating warehouse. And the icebreakers would just break on the way to the Northern Sea route. And very soon, Russia's strategy in that region is going to be published. And we'll have to protect that region. Thank you so much. The Russian Foreign Ministry once again stresses there is a understanding that international cooperation in the Arctic region bears consensus nature, but in practice we are made to strengthen our military might there. We spoke about submarines in the preamble to the discussion. You can find a quotation from Stoltenberg, but he speaks about submarines, and Russia is second to the United States in terms of the number of submarines. And this is actually what we have to do, what we have to change. I mean, the Russian Defense Ministry consensus nature, that's good. But we have to pay more attention to strengthening of our positions in different areas. Info policy should be continued the way, or should be followed the way that no one would doubt that Russia has long-standing interests in that region. Thank you so much, Mr. Vinokurov. We are running out of time, actually. Yulia, just I apologize, one more remark. Deputy Foreign Minister quite recently said that along with that, Russia will not keep silent. Mr. Repkov said about that. Russia will not keep silent if someone doubts our capacity to protect our own interests sometimes. You have to take pink glasses off and to look at the real situation. Not pursuing the wishful thinking. Thank you so much. I apologize. Thank you. Just we would like to be right on time so that our colleagues could plan their further schedule. I have the final question to all the speakers. I do hope that Mr. Anderson is still with us. Quite brief question and simple one. Next year, Russia assumes its presidentship in the Arctic Council. That international organization, in my opinion, is not very active in terms of promoting its position in the region. So that means that there are some expert opinions there, but no specific decisions are being taken. My question goes to all the speakers in the context of the cold info war in the Arctic region. Should the Arctic Council act as something to bring everyone together for dialogue? And should Russia, under its chairmanship, promote peace initiatives and bring circumpolar countries and observers to some peaceful dialogue and help follow a peaceful track? Mr. Anderson, over to you. We just have only 5 to 7 minutes. Team, what do you think about that?
Dialogue and peaceful cooperation is always important, I think. I just want to reiterate a bit about how we see journalists in this info war and Cold War, as the previous speakers speak about. Journalists in itself or journalism is a key ingredient in a healthy society. Its main role is to criticize and show the weakness of when people are being treated badly, of when the power to be is hypocritical or corrupt even. I think this is a natural thing to expect from journalism. Then, of course, you can take an image that, or make an image that this is also part of some info war being steered by certain companies, media companies or governments, and that might be true in many cases. I don't, however, think this is the case when it comes to threats towards Russia from the Nordic countries, at least. We don't have that sort of a system in place here. We have very independent journalists that try to do their best with the work and the information they have with them. When it comes to your question, Julian, I think it's, of course, the Arctic Forum and Arctic networks that are there to be a peaceful way of talking about these issues. That I think we'd rather talk about how we can find a peaceful coexistence than how many submarines United States and Russia have. I think also Russia would be very happy and glad in the long term to have more of these fruitful, peaceful talks about how the Northern Sea route can be used in an international manner. I think that, how to avoid a new Cold War or how to heat up the Cold War in a positive way is that some of the parts involved in the conflict is also taking the high ground and saying, yeah, we want a peaceful cooperation. We deem that this is beneficial for all parties. However, I see that it's at the current political states, both in the United States, that is the big player, and Russia might be as well, it's hard to move away from these quite locked positions. But that's my just personal observation. And I really hope that Russia and the whole Arctic Council takes some more concrete, peaceful steps forward.
Thank you, team. Vladimir Petrovsky, пожалуйста.
Vladimir Petrovsky, over to you. Really, that's a very important question related to the fact that Russia is going to assume chairmanship in the Arctic Council. This opens up a lot of opportunities for our diplomacy, and this implies a lot of responsibility what we can do, what we have discussed today. I think it has to be reflected in the agenda of the sessions of the Arctic Council, and Russia can speak about supporting international security in the Arctic region. It would echo the proposition made by the Russian Foreign Ministry, which Russian diplomats promote in the United Nations with the support of China, by the way. I think that this is what we can do within the Arctic Council. It may be a special item of the agenda. And the second direction, which is also very possible, experts are debating the reshaping or reforming of the Arctic Council. We spoke about militarization of the Arctic region. For instance, there is a proposition which has been discussed to extend the mandate of the Arctic Council and let it discuss military issues. So this can be done by consensus decision, but at least we can discuss that. Number 3, I think that within its chairmanship, Russia will be able to impact the info agenda. Just one very brief case. We spoke a lot about militarization, alleged militarization in the Arctic region. We can remind our colleagues in the media that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation almost completed a large-scale program on collection of household waste there and recycling of radioactive wastes. So this campaign was done in Novaya Zemlya and Novosibirsk Islands. A lot has been done. This initiative was proposed by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and it did on its own be backed by its military infrastructure. What I'm driving you to, we can arrange a special tour for Russian and international tourists without certainly breaking any military secrets, to show what is being done by the Russian Defense Ministry to support environmental security. I think that would be very good, very positive. Thank you. I think that very soon we'll rid the Arctic region of all the wastes. Mr. Vinokurov, very brief. Be brief, please. Certainly, today we have the following trend in the Arctic region, which is related to military and political situation in the region. Really, the Charter of the Arctic Council of 1996 does not imply the discussion of military issues. And if these documents can be revised in the sense of allowing the Arctic Council to discuss military issues, it would be good. For some time, there was a dialogue between the Joint Chiefs of Staff of Russia and the United States. And from time to time, they discussed the Arctic issues as well. And now these negotiations are reduced to zero and the Arctic issues are not discussed there. And this is something which we have to do. We have to do our best in order to turn the situation in the media sphere with a focus on the Arctic region, the way that no one doubts that Russia has natural interests in that region, and secondly, that we will not allow anyone to instruct us how to do what to do in that region. Thank you. And certainly, the Russian chairmanship will offer lots of initiatives because this is a defining feature of our foreign policy. And I hope that the international community will put an end to that sluggish turn to the negative development of the situation. Thank you so much. Thank you, dear colleagues. Let me wrap it up. It's obvious to anyone that cold info war in the Arctic region goes on, but we can put an end to that, and we can make the Arctic region a territory of tourism, environment, and polar bears, so that they are masters of that territory, so that the masters there are not people or submarines. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our experts. So again, thank you for being with us at the Second International Northern Forum on Sustainable Development.